Yes. Got it. So this survey was run from the end of May through June for a couple weeks. And we just wanted to share some of the learnings that we pulled from that and talk about kind of what we're doing with that with Climate Champions. So thanks to everyone for attending. And yeah, like Andrew said, if you have questions that pop up as we're going, feel free to raise your hand in Zoom here. I don't mind. And then we also have time for questions at the end. So whatever you want to do there. So I just wanted to start off with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we live, work, and play on the traditional lands of the Aihehe Nakota nations of Goodstoney, Chiniki, and Bearspaw, the nations of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Kainai, Kainai, and Siksika, and the Tsuut'ina First Nation and the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. And one point that I just wanted to make, as we're talking about climate change here, the perspective of many Indigenous peoples is that climate change is a result of the imbalance in our relationship with the natural world and a result of a loss of connection of us with the land. So I think as we do this work, we really have an opportunity to be led by Indigenous knowledge and their worldviews, and just kind of following this idea of being stewards to the land. So I've been trying to sort of bring that perspective to the forefront as I've been doing this work with our Climate Champions. So yeah, what brought us to doing this survey in the first place is our Climate Champions program. So as Andrew mentioned, this is an online platform that's we're trying to design to provide the residents of the Bow Valley and businesses with training, tools, and kind of a support network to really, I guess, mainstream this climate change conversation. So giving them the tools to educate their fellow citizens about the impacts of climate change and really become a motivator for their peers to take action to reduce our climate impacts. And then connecting community members and trying to create a sense of identity within this broader climate mitigation movement. So at the bottom here, I've just put up a screenshot of kind of what Climate Champions is going to look like. So this is our wildlife ambassadors training. So Climate Champions is kind of following in the footsteps here. It's also going to be on the same platform. So it's going to kind of look similar. And hopefully, if we have a chance at the end, we do have, Andrew has the Wildlife Ambassadors program up. So if we have a few minutes, he can screen share that and we can kind of just click around and show you guys hopefully what this is going to look like in the near future. So as we were kind of brainstorming and what's going to go into the Climate Champions platform, we had a few questions about what people already know, how do they feel about climate change, and what information they're lacking. So, where do we need to fill gaps for people? So step one was really to review the existing polling on climate change. And there actually is a lot of information out there. We've put together a document, which we can also send around for those of you that haven't seen it, just sort of summarizing some of the findings. But some of the main points that we found, and this is from a sort of Canada-wide was our focus, but that the population is on board with climate change. They believe in climate change and they are concerned about it. But there's really this large, they call it a movable middle of the population, that they're concerned, but they're not really engaged. They're not necessarily taking action. They don't necessarily know what to do. There's really strong support for things like clean energy projects, even in places like Alberta that are so dependent on oil and gas. But there is a lack of knowledge on kind of the science behind climate change and also the solutions. People don't really see how climate change connects with other social issues like equity And so they have these other priorities in their lives, like economics, that kind of thing, and they don't necessarily connect that to climate change. So we sort of have competing priorities rather than what we would like to see a focus on, which is seeing the connections and synergies between those things. And then really just that solutions are what creates momentum and hope for people. So that was kind of what we found from existing polling across Canada and Alberta. So looking at what we wanted to do for climate champions, we did want to define our audience a little bit more. So focusing on the people that we are going to engage within our climate champions program and focusing on their needs within the context of that broader Canadian population and sort of that information that we already knew from that existing polling. So we do want to inform our content with really local data from the people that are in the Bow Valley and see how they differ from that general population. And we've kind of been thinking about this as like a design thinking approach to the Climate Champions platform. So we're sort of in the survey portion in this empathize and define region. And then we can move into coming up with the ideas and prototyping our platform based on that information. So some of the key takeaways that we're going to go through throughout here, but people are having frequent conversations about climate change, and they are actually relatively comfortable doing so. So our goal of Climate Champions, one of the main things is to have people be in a network and really just be having more conversations with people, have this be kind of a mainstream thing that people are talking about. So that has legs. People are already kind of doing this a little bit. Some of the other findings were that people generally do have a good understanding of the science behind climate change and its impacts, but there's this lack of understanding of the effectiveness and the impact of different climate actions. And we found no correlation between what people know about the science of climate change and their understanding of the actions to actually prevent climate change. So our interpretation of this is that people don't really need more information about climate change. They actually need direction on how to take action, specifically prioritizing effective actions rather than these things that have maybe a small impact. So just to talk about the survey design in general, most of the questions were sourced from Yale Climate Connections and the questions that they use. So that was sort of our inspiration. The survey was open between May 28th and June 13th of this year. We had a total of 108 responses, and their average time to complete the survey was 8 minutes and 22 seconds. I think something to note and keep in mind as we go through these results is that the respondents are likely a subset of already engaged citizens. So the way we were promoting the survey is, first of all, we looked at the EV Expo attendance. We did that in person. So these are people who are already, a little bit intrigued by electric vehicles. So we can imagine that they're kind of already have this, potentially this climate change concerns in mind. And then we also sent it out to our Shift, which is our climate change newsletter, and our Bear Report newsletter subscribers. So again, these are people who, they're at least somewhat engaged in either like a climate or environmental kind of mindset. This isn't necessarily a general population. So the findings that we've taken away might be different for, say, the average Bow Valley resident. So some of the learnings were that doing this survey in person didn't work super well. It was a bit longer, and people, I think at the EV Expo, they were a bit distracted by all the other things that were going on. we had a lot more uptake and a lot faster time for them to complete when they did it at home on their own computer. So I think that was just, something that we took away from this, of doing a survey that is a bit longer and, takes some serious thought for some of these questions, was maybe better in a situation where people can sit down and focus. And then quickly, just to go through the demographics, something to note here is that we didn't make demographics mandatory for people to fill out. So this isn't capturing all participants, but this is kind of the information that we have. We had the greatest response from people in the age range of 60 to 74, mostly Canmore residents. And then we also had a higher uptake from female identifying of people. So that's kind of just the demographics to keep in mind. And then getting into our survey results. So as I kind of mentioned in our takeaways, we have an audience that knows climate change is happening and is already talking about climate change fairly frequently and pretty comfortably. But we do think there's some room for improvement with these conversations. So nearly 70% of our respondents are talking about climate change on at least a weekly basis. So most of them are falling in this 5 or more times, or in 3 to 4 times per week, or sorry, per month. So that was pretty frequent. We were actually pretty pleased with how often this is coming up for these people. And then quizzing people on their comfort level. Most people, so in anywhere from 50 to 90%, depending on the audience that we're talking about, is somewhat to very comfortable talking about climate change with, we talked about friends, family, colleagues, and teachers. So yeah, pretty high levels of comfort with that. We next asked about people's perception of climate change and where they think their knowledge falls. So almost all of our respondents know that there's a scientific consensus about climate change. They think that most scientists think that climate change is happening. And then asking about how well informed they think they are about how Earth's climate system works, and then how well informed they think they are about the ways they can reduce climate change. Most people think they have a fairly good to very good understanding. If we compare that with the greater polling results, we can see that that's higher than both the average Canadian and the average Albertan. So that's under certainty about climate change, and then saying whether they are fairly well to well informed. We're slightly higher in the Bow Valley than the average Canadian on certainty, and actually quite a lot higher on how people are self-ranking their level of knowledge. So moving into some of the climate science and climate impacts, our audience has actually a really good base of knowledge on the mechanisms behind climate change and the impacts that we will see in the Bow Valley. So looking at some of our questions on climate science, respondents are well aware of the major greenhouse gases that impact climate change, and the link between carbon dioxide and global warming is pretty well understood. One thing that did kind of surprise us, two of the questions that had really the least consensus was on some of the definitions of climate and climate versus weather. So we asked, does climate mean the average weather conditions for a region? And then asked people to say false, true or false. And then climate often changes from year to year. And we can see there's quite a bit of spread here. And I guess just for note, I've marked the correct answer with these little check marks. So just to kind of give you guys a reference there. So, maybe this is kind of this link between extreme weather and climate change is maybe confusing people on the definitions a little bit. But this is kind of a gap that we figured we can really easily kind of cover of like, what is weather versus what is climate? How are they related and how are they different? And then looking at climate change impacts, this was probably one of the more difficult questions that we asked. We said, which image do you think best represents the expected volume of water in Alberta's glacier-fed rivers over the coming decades? So almost 3/4 of the respondents were able to identify that the loss of glaciers will negatively affect our water supplies. So they answered either C or D, with the water going down over time. And then we had 42% correctly identified that we will have initially increased volumes as we have increased melt, but then as our supply, that reservoir of water that's held in our glaciers is reduced over time, then we have this overall decrease. So we were pretty impressed with like this being kind of a bit more of a complex question, and most people, getting the general idea and the majority getting the correct answer. So in a comparison with polling on climate change knowledge tests, again, we're polling higher than the average Canadian and the average Albertan on both. So their metrics were for this Learning for a Sustainable Future test, passed over 50%. We were a fair bit higher. And then getting into that 80th percentile, again, quite a lot higher. So exceeding the knowledge of both average Canadians and Albertans. Keeping in mind a bit of a caveat that these were different tests. They asked a 10-question test that was different from the questions that we asked as our knowledge tests. And then we also, again, have this subset of potentially more engaged citizens versus the Learning for a Sustainable Future was, a general polling where they're aggregating enough of a spread of respondents that they can say that's kind of like an average Canadian or Albertan. So our last kind of big learning here was that despite a fairly well-informed and engaged audience, we have a really big gap in their understanding of effective climate action. So I think this is one of our biggest opportunities, is being able to present them with the right information to help guide their efforts towards high impact solutions, and then help them push that out to their networks as well, like getting the right information out there that we can actually take actions that make a difference. So I know there's a lot on this slide. We asked respondents to rate personal climate actions by what they thought their impacts were. And we gave them a big range of anything from recycling to switching to a plant-based diet or buying renewable power. So at first glance, they're all basically the same, right? Everything's kind of between that 3 to 4, like this really middle of the road kind of ranking. So we're like, immediately, people can't really distinguish between low impact actions and high impact actions. So we get this average 3 rating for everything. But as we dug into the data a little bit more, we actually saw that there's this almost binary rating from everyone. So for all actions, whether they're high impact or low impact, people are rating them really low and really high. So on taking fewer long haul flights, that would be one of our highest impact actions. There's a pretty big number of people who are calling that a 1 out of 5. Same thing with switching to LEDs, which would be a lower impact. People are rating that 4 or 5 out of 5. Recycling plastics was one of the ones that kind of stood out of having just this big spread across the entire scale. So, and just for reference, I've outlined what we counted as the correct answer is outlined in green here. So we gave them kind of a ±1 for what was the correct answer. So when we go in and compare what people got on our knowledge portion of the science and impacts versus this climate actions, we can see this totally different distribution, right? So on the left-hand side, the knowledge score, people are actually doing really well. The maximum was 23, and most people are falling in the 16 to 20 out of 23. Versus it's almost like the complete opposite on the climate impacts. Most people are actually doing pretty poorly. And I feel like we gave, a pretty big buffer on the scale of what we counted as a correct answer. And then doing a statistical analysis of this, we have no significant correlation between their knowledge of climate change and then their understanding of the impacts of different actions. And this is something that other people have seen as well. So this is global polling by Ipsos that's showing the exact same trends, that people tend to overestimate the least effective actions and then underestimate the most impactful actions. And I know the text on this is really small and you probably can't read it, but what it lays out here is that actual rank is top to bottom of the most effective actions to the least effective at the bottom. And the green bars are how people rated them. And again, we see almost this inverse trend of people thinking that the least effective actions are going to have the biggest impact. And I think that's a huge barrier for actually making climate mitigation happen, is people have the wrong ideas in their mind and they're putting their efforts toward things that are probably not having that much impact on our emissions overall. So some of our biggest takeaways for climate champions was a minimal focus on climate science. Our audience for climate champions is already pretty well informed, but it doesn't correlate with action. So that's what we really want to prioritize, is prioritizing these effective climate actions that people can take and people can tell their friends to take. And then connecting climate action with other social issues. This kind of came from that greater polling, but just making it so that this is not competing with the other things that people have going on in their lives. And then working to enhance conversations with the correct information and giving people communication tools. So we know these conversations are happening, but the information that they have is not always correct. And we think that we can give people tools to engage with people who are, maybe not totally on board with the whole climate change thing, and just give them more confidence to go into those conversations. And then just kind of summarizing into, this is kind of fed into our broader idea of how we're going to guide climate champions, is looking at empathizing with difficult emotions that come with climate change. This kind of conversations have, negative impacts on people, like causing a lot of anxiety and that sort of thing. Helping participants to understand those high impact solutions, like we discussed. Number 3, giving participants the tools to have confident and productive conversations. And then demonstrating momentum to really inspire people to take action, so that they know that they're not the only ones, that other people are engaged and they're doing this too. And then what we've tried to do, so we have 5 different modules, but we really want to weave in to each of the modules the concepts of equity, no one left behind, working in Indigenous perspectives, thinking about collective change, and then focusing on local effects and actions that are relevant to people in the Bow Valley. This is not, just about sea level change or polar bears, things that are far away that, don't impact us in the Bow Valley. It's, about glaciers and wildlife, the kind of things that people see every day that, can make this a bit more real for them. And that's all we have for you today. So yeah, if anyone has any questions, we can certainly chat about those. And we will send these around afterwards, because in the appendix, I've also included, we had a handful more questions that I didn't put into the presentation just to save time. But if you want to look at the other questions and the results we had from those, they'll be in the backup slides for the presentation.
Go for it, Carla.
Guys, this is awesome. Sorry I was a couple minutes late there, and I'm not sure if maybe I missed the answer to my question at the beginning. So sorry if that's the case. But first of all, I think this is super fantastic, Chelsea. I think that, yeah, that disconnect between the knowledge and level of impact of your actions is super, super interesting, and like feels like a really good way to channel this information. So yeah, I'm just really excited about that. I'm curious, like, actually, can you just explain the Climate Champions program a little bit more? And sorry if I did miss that part and it's redundant, I can go look it up after. But I
No
was just
worries.
curious to know, so I'm assuming the idea of that is that we're going to be getting the relatively engaged citizens better training on climate to be champions in the community, or is that like, yeah, okay.
Yeah, exactly. So this was the slide that I had in for Climate Champions. I'm not sure if you were here for this slide or not, but yeah, exactly. So this is a training that, should be fairly accessible to people, but it is going to take them, maybe a few hours of time to go through all of the content. So
okay,
these are probably going to be people who are already interested in climate change. They want to know more. They want to know what they can do. So that was sort of our thinking behind the survey of saying like, okay, are we worried about getting information on the whole Bow Valley, or do we want to just focus on this subset of people that are going to do the training or potentially going to do the training? And so that's kind of the direction that we went is, okay, who is our audience? Not necessarily, we're not trying to reach everyone in the Bow Valley. We're hoping that the people who do the Climate Champions training through their networks can eventually reach the people in the Bow Valley and, give them the tools to have conversations that the people who aren't engaged, maybe they can, just plant something for those people, and try and engage those people that way.
Totally. No, and that makes so much sense then as to why the demographic that was engaged. Like that's, yeah, totally. Okay. No, I was just still curious a little bit more like how you'll be recruiting for this program. And then is there any kind of, so if I'm a wildlife ambassador, what's in it for me apart from my goodwill of wanting to do that and be a change agent in the community? Or is it kind of counting on people who really do feel like they need that education and need better training to have those conversations out there? How will that work?
I can jump in there if you want. And I'll ask Andrea too as well. She's been putting some good thinking towards this, but yeah, I think absolutely anyone can take it on, and we'll certainly be putting it out through our networks and asking, other people who have similar related networks to be sharing this kind of opportunity. And I think that's the first one. And then specifically targeting other people and groups who might be more likely to be having these conversations already, just so that we can arm them with the tools that they need to have really effective conversations. And I don't know, a really interesting point that Andrew has brought to this is through Rachel Lertzman's work. And it's all about grief around climate change and how that is getting people really sucked into a bad place sometimes, and how to move through that effectively. And so that's what Chelsea was saying around that hope and action, is that if we can provide this like concrete, actionable starting blocks for people, then we have a more hopeful conversation, and it kind of moves people out of climate anxiety a little bit. So yeah, we'll be looking at doing, if we get all the funding that we want for it, then we'll be doing in-person workshops and sort of community events around it as well. And so combining that online with the in-person, I think it's really effective sort of models to have learning where you can go at your own pace and go back through things at your own pace and kind of consider things is like great for online. And then in-person connection and kind of mulling over concepts and having a conversation to better understand things. It's so much better in person. So that's the mix we want to use.
Yeah. No, so great. I think that climate anxiety piece is super important in providing tangible solutions. Yeah. Yeah, this is fantastic. Thanks so much.
Anyone else?
I got a couple of quick things. This is amazing. I copied and pasted, sorry if I'm getting sued for copyright or something. I copied and pasted a bunch of slides and sent them back to my team. So nicely done. How many questions were in the survey total? I'm just curious. I'm going to divide that by the number of minutes it took to do the survey. So.
Yes, good question. I'll have to tally that up and get back to you on that.
It's okay. I don't need an exact number. Like, was it 5 or 20 or 100?
Oh, yeah, no, we were more along the line of like 20 questions.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. Thanks.
Yeah.
The other thing that was interesting to me was, I'm sure it was to everybody, was that disconnect. And I wonder if some of those, if there's sort of a psychological effect there where people look at things that they know that they can do, like changing an LED light bulb, and they say, I can do that, and therefore it has a high impact. Whereas there's these other things that I feel like I can't do or that are not my problem, and therefore maybe don't assign as high of an impact to it. I wonder if there's some psychology there as well. I'd be curious to compare the LED light bulb question to a question about like, what if you ate half as much meat, for example, like another smaller personal thing. It'd be interesting to look at the root cause of that. I guess that's all I'm saying.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think there would be value in asking that question too, of just like, what are you willing to do? And how does that differ from what we think of as being these really high impact? Because that's ultimately, if it's unreasonable for people, then we're not really at that point where people are going to take that on. So yeah, I think you're totally right.
I guess I just add, like, I think people are really, really good at rationalizing their behaviors. And what goes with that is sort of the idea, oh, I made this, I did this change in it, I'm doing my part. But really, how much of an impact is that having?
Yeah. And I think that's where we've been talking about this a lot too, of how much is this sort of greenwashing, like eco-friendly, just recycle, how much is that like gotten into people's brains where that's what they think of? They hear climate change and they think zero waste. And it's like, that's a piece of it, but it's a smaller piece of it. And so it's trying to bring that in of giving people doable actions for them in their lives, but also trying to promote these things that have a bit more of a footprint behind them.
And I would maybe, oh, sorry, Andrew.
No, you jump in, go for it. We'll get to it.
I would just, yeah, sure. I'd just add that I think that's why we're talking a lot about how to have conversations and how to navigate anxiety and navigate emotions, because you can say, well, taking a flight is going to make a big impact, and you can believe that, but then you can also have this ambivalence about how it's going to impact your life. And so I think what I see is really exciting about this program is like maybe we're giving tools in people's hand to have better, more nuanced conversations and actually just recognize the ambivalence that people are feeling, which is just mixed emotions, right? And I think we all have it about climate change in different ways, and that's what's getting us stuck. So I think that's an exciting aspect we're hoping to bring to this as well.
Nice. I was going to say, thanks for that, Andrea. Michael, the next step I could see in this sort of evolution of things would be, if we have information on what are some of the local actions and what in the Bow Valley, what impacts that have, because some of these things, right, we've pulled general data or we copied what City of Calgary or City of Edmonton did, but the actual numbers might be slightly different in the Bow Valley. So that's one thing. And then as Chelsea kind of said, how much are people doing this behavior already? And how, if they're not, then how likely are they to change and what are the barriers? And that would set us up to develop a program to meet those barriers and target the behavior that has the least prevalence currently and like the most potential impact. And we can start putting that message out. Yeah, that's a more involved survey and some more involved data with it. And we need the help of the towns to do that for sure, but be interested. Amal, you had a question, you've been waiting patiently.
It's okay. I was hesitant. I'm sorry about my voice, but I hope you can hear me. Thank you so much, Chelsea. My question would be, from your presentation, I noticed that climate knowledge and climate solutions to you entail scientific understanding. Do you think climate knowledge is only scientifically based? Because I think recently in eco-criticism, there's been a push against privileging one epistemology over the other. There's a book by Mike Hume called Climate Change that shows that people sometimes deal with climate change by praying or dancing. And so what do you think, like, and about solutions as well, like there's a book by Greg Gerard called Climate Skepticism that shows, he did a study in Britain, and it showed that people who don't believe in climate change actually are the same as people who like believe in it as a fact, because people who believe in it as a fact go to it from a point of despair, which is what Andrew was talking about, that fear of like, well, nothing's gonna matter. So my question is, what do you think of solutions that fall outside of the scientific solutions? If that question makes sense, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. No, I think that's a really good point. Like, that is a bit of a problem that we've really focused on this from this very scientific, like at least the mechanisms behind climate change are very focused in the science space. And that, I think that was probably most of our questions were asked, at least in the knowledge space, on, they were focused around that. And maybe that's just like an easier thing to quantify in a space like this. I think that would be a really interesting conversation to have, like, as we do talk about how do we figure out like what are people's barriers to climate change. We've talked about maybe we need to do like a focus group, because it's really hard to get that information out of people on an online survey. And I think that would maybe fall under that too, of like actually having a conversation with people and getting a bit more of that emotional side. And then as far as the solutions, I think we're definitely going to try and bring that in. And that's just like a great reminder. I'm definitely going to make a note of that. But, you know, a lot of this is going to be focused around like, yeah, the emotional, the anxiety. And so I think, like, again, in sort of that solution space, it's, yeah, getting out of that, maybe like, what is the CO2 equivalent emissions? Like, that's important, but it's not the only thing. So yeah, that's a great point to make. Thank you.
I guess I have a question, or and maybe it's sort of spinning off of, is it Amand, that your question there? Amand, that I was curious about the you mentioned a need to, or an opportunity to sort of build connection points between climate action and climate knowledge and other sort of social justice or social innovation kind of spaces, and that can be a challenge. And I'm curious if there was anything in the survey that shed some light on that kind of any solution spaces or any information around those particular barriers, and or maybe that's a space for some of those conversations to try to unpack, because it's something I've observed as well in Bow Valley and in some of the work we're doing as an area of particular challenge.
Yeah, I think the barriers side, that was again, like thinking about maybe a future focus group, because we felt like we were not going to get the kind of broad enough engagement with the survey from the populations that we need to hear from for that case. yeah, we really want to focus on what are the barriers, but what are the barriers for different groups of people. And so making like a very concerted effort to get the right people in the room for those conversations. So I think that's definitely like a bit of a future project. Yeah, I don't know. Andrew, do you have anything else to add on that?
Yeah, I think you summarized it pretty well, is that this audience is like, we want to create the connections to climate justice with climate champions, and for them to understand that and the link to that. But I don't believe, and maybe I'm slightly wrong, that they're the like audience that is suffering from that in the same way. So as Chelsea's saying, like, we also need to be involved in that dialogue to better understand what's going on in this place around, and that we need to act on, if that makes sense.
Thank you, it does. And the results are really amazing and really enlightening. So thank you for sharing them. I've really learned a lot and can identify with some of this, with some of the results and some of the challenges you've pointed to. So thank you for the work.
Thanks, Jeannie.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? I can take you on a little bit of a tour of the platform if you would like. Just spend a couple minutes doing that. Share my screen. Can you see that now? A second.
Yeah.
Great, thanks. So yeah, this is for our wildlife ambassadors. So we've developed this platform with a local company called Analog Digital. And they've been really great. It's using Thinkific is the brand name of the platform, and then you can go in and edit lots of different pieces of it. So our Wildlife Ambassador program is a group of volunteers who go out to trailheads and talk to the public about wildlife coexistence and just how to be both safe and take good care of the land and the environment whilst you're on trails. So this is a very specialized sort of group that we're using it for, and putting this stuff online has allowed us to kind of cut down a whole day of in-person training, and then our day of in-person training for them is all scenario based and giving feedback to each other and speaking and practicing. And then what we will have is climate champions and wildlife champions. And so wildlife champions is the same sort of thing. We want people to have the information that they need and the conversation skills to be able to talk to their friends and say, oh, you're planning to hike there? Oh, actually it's peak berry season. Let's pick somewhere else, or something similar. So anyway, there's the context. But yeah, you get this lovely menu on the left-hand side to sort of show where you're up to, and it kicks along. And then we can put lots of different things in here. Watch a video, mark it as complete. And then we put in a bunch of different slides here to break stuff down. And this is just knowledge. And then throughout, we then have like knowledge check questions. So these can be survey sort of style, multi-choice, open-ended things, and different reflections. But we try and like line that up with each chunk of knowledge so that people learn something and then they have a little like check about it to help them learn. This is just another example. We can put stuff and embed information right into the page. So this is just a map showing the common locations that the wildlife ambassadors go, but anything that has an embed code can go straight into here. It also has little, is this one? Little videos that kind of pop up, and we can create and just have a soundtrack so we can record ourselves saying this information over it. I've just got it on mute at the moment. So just lots of different ways to break up the training and make it a little bit more interesting. And then, yeah, with these quiz questions at the end as well. So yeah, it's kind of goes like that. The idea is that it's broken up so that every time you go back in, you can see where you're up to, and you kind of have that sense of progress as it's going through.
So Andrews, the wildlife one is already done and like being used, and the climate one is in like development right now, or sorry?
So we've got three: the ambassadors, wildlife, and climate. So the ambassadors is done. We've currently shifted to working on our first module out of 5 on climate champions. And then with our current funding from the Rotary Club of Canmore, we have funding to do 1 more module. So we'll likely at this point probably do a second climate one. If Chelsea's working on that hard, if she gets all that done, then we'll do 2 climate ones. Originally we were going to do 1 of the wildlife and 1 of the climate, but we'll see. And then, yeah, we're seeking some further funding opportunities to sort of build out the whole program, but figured that having a module to show potential funders is like pretty powerful. It's like, it's here, it's ready. We just need a little bit more money to get it happening. But yeah, this had pretty good feedback from the wildlife ambassadors, and we'll do some tweaks and things, but yeah. I don't know what else. I think that's, yeah, if no one has any other questions, then thanks for coming along and learning, and let us know if you have any other brain sparks or want any more information about any of this. But it's been really fun to share, and just like huge thank you for Chelsea to coming on and doing all this work for us. It's been amazing having you here, and yeah.
Yeah, thanks everyone for showing up today, and we'll send out the slides. And yeah, like Andrew said, if you have questions that come up or even ideas for us, like, you know, we're still in this kind of creation phase of the Climate Champions modules. So having your guys' input on what you think is useful and effective to go into that is really nice as well.
Thanks so much. This is great. Would love to stay in the loop.
Awesome, thanks.